A cocky lawyer decides to sue a young person accused of theft, completely dismissing their claims of innocence. Convinced of his own superiority, he pushes the case forward, but as the trial unfolds, unexpected events begin to bring the real truth to light. David was a name both respected and feared in the courts. From a young age, he stood out for his sharp intellect and the ruthless way he handled his cases. It didn't take long for him to become one of the most renowned lawyers in his city, known for his ability to dismantle any opposing argument. Every victory in court only fueled his thirst for triumph, and he collected wins like trophies, always seeking more recognition and prestige. However, along with his success came a growing arrogance. David took pride in his ability to twist situations to his favor and always come out on top. He rarely admitted to mistakes, firmly believing that if something went wrong, it was the fault of others, never his. This inflated confidence shielded him from criticism and made him indifferent to any shortcomings, because, in his mind, any battle could be won as long as he was in control. It was a morning like any other for David, except for the fact that he was handling a particularly complex case. In his office, he was going over the documents with the help of his assistant, Kevin, a talented but still inexperienced young man. The room was filled with piles of papers, folders meticulously organized across the large desk. "Kevin, did you go over the files I asked for?" David asked, without looking up from the documents. "Yes, sir. It's all here in the briefcase." "The contracts and notes from the last deposition you requested," Kevin replied, pointing to the leather briefcase resting beside the desk. David glanced at the briefcase with satisfaction. "Great. I'm taking this home tonight. I need to go through these documents carefully before presenting them to the judge on Monday." Kevin frowned, hesitant. "Wouldn't you rather I take it to your house for you? I can drop it off later." David shook his head, a slight smirk of superiority on his face. "No, Kevin, that's not necessary. This is too important to leave in your hands. I'll swing by the coffee shop down the street, grab a quick drink, and then take it home. I need to make sure everything's perfect. I can't afford a mistake right now." "Understood, sir. Just be careful with the briefcase. There's a lot of valuable stuff in there," Kevin added, still a bit concerned. "Kevin, you're dealing with David. Have you ever seen me lose something?" "Trust me," he said, already putting on his jacket and getting ready to leave. "See you tomorrow." David grabbed the briefcase, gave a brief wave, and walked out of the office with the same confidence that defined him. His destination was the coffee shop he frequented on high-pressure days, a quiet and comfortable spot. As he entered the coffee shop, he was greeted by the barista, a friendly middle-aged woman. "Good morning, Mr. David." "The usual?" she asked as he settled into one of the tables by the window. "Yes, please." "A black coffee, no sugar," he replied, unfolding the newspaper he had tucked under his arm. While waiting, David flipped through the pages of the newspaper, his eyes glued to the legal headlines, always on the lookout for new cases or something that could capture his attention. Soon, the barista brought his drink and set it on the table. "Here you go, sir. Do you need anything else?" "No, that's perfect. Thank you," he said, not taking his eyes off the newspaper. For a few minutes, David was immersed in his reading, slowly sipping his coffee. When he finished, he folded the newspaper, placed it on the table, stood up quickly, and left, striding out with firm and decisive steps, completely unaware that he had left the briefcase on the floor next to the chair. Minutes later, a young man named Justin entered the cafe. He wore simple clothes and carried a stack of resumes in his hands, which he had been distributing around the city in search of a job. With a tired but determined expression, he approached the counter. "Good morning, could I have a glass of water, please?" he asked with a shy smile. The barista smiled back. "Sure, here you go," she said, placing a glass of water on the counter. Justin thanked her and headed to a nearby table to rest for a bit. It was then that he noticed something strange. a leather briefcase, left behind next to a chair. He looked around, but no one seemed to be paying attention to the briefcase. "Whose briefcase is this?" he asked the barista, curiosity piqued. "Oh, I think it belonged to a gentleman who was sitting here a little while ago," she replied thoughtfully. "He seemed important, you know. White hair, tall, serious look, and, of course, he was wearing an impeccable suit." Justin furrowed his brow. "He left without it? This could be important." "Yes, I think so. I didn't see him leave, but he's not here anymore," said the barista, looking around as if she could suddenly spot him. "He comes here every now and then, always very serious." Justin scratched his head, glancing at the briefcase and then back at the barista. "I think I'll try to find him. It's not right to leave something like this here. Who knows what could be inside this briefcase?" "If you think you can find him, go ahead," she said, with an approving look. "You seem to have good intentions." Justin nodded, carefully picked up the briefcase, and left the cafe, determined to locate the man who had left it behind. With his heart racing, he looked around, trying to decide where David might have gone. He knew he was about to get involved in something much bigger than he imagined, but his desire to do the right thing pushed him forward. Meanwhile, David was walking down the sidewalk toward his home, his thoughts still consumed by the documents he had reviewed earlier. His mind wandered through the details of the case he was working on until suddenly, a feeling of discomfort began to wash over him. He stopped abruptly and looked at his empty hands. Where was the briefcase? "It can't be," he murmured to himself, his eyes wide as reality hit him hard. He immediately started walking back toward the cafe, his pace quickening as anxiety surged in his chest. "How could I forget the briefcase? Of all days," he grumbled under his breath, his face turning red with frustration. The weight of the importance of those documents made his heart race. Halfway there, however, David spotted something that made his blood boil instantly, a young man, seemingly humble, carrying his briefcase. The unmistakable brown leather was tucked under the young man's arm, who appeared to be walking calmly. "What the?" David stopped for a second, narrowing his eyes as he stared at the young man. "He stole my briefcase," he thought, immediately jumping to conclusions. Without considering any other possibility, David dashed toward the young man, his fury growing with each step. When he got close enough, he grabbed Justin's arm tightly, almost yanking the briefcase from his hands. "Hey, what do you think you're doing with my briefcase?" David shouted, his furious gaze fixed on the young man, who looked back at him in shock. Justin tried to break free, surprised by the sudden aggression. "Sir, I found the briefcase at the cafe and was trying to return it," he said, his voice trembling as David held him firmly. "Return it? Don't make me laugh, thief." David snarled, tightening his grip on the young man's arm. "Did you think you could walk off with my briefcase and I wouldn't notice? What nonsense. You're going to regret this bitterly." "But, sir, I swear, I just wanted to return it. The barista even told me it was yours." Justin desperately tried to explain, but David had already decided the young man's fate in his mind. "I don't want to hear your lame excuses. I'll take you to the police myself. You're going to pay for this, you petty criminal," David said, practically dragging Justin while holding the briefcase in his other hand. Justin, desperate, continued trying to justify himself. "Please, sir, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to help you." "Help? I don't need your help. What I need is for people like you to learn not to mess with what isn't yours." David huffed, his words dripping with contempt. "And I'm going to make sure you learn that lesson the hard way." They arrived at the police station quickly, as it was just a few blocks away. As soon as David entered the place, he started speaking loudly, his words filled with indignation. "Officer, I want to file an immediate report," he said, still holding Justin by the arm. "This young man here stole my briefcase. I caught him red-handed with it, and I have no doubt he was planning to take everything inside. The officer, a stocky middle-aged man, looked at David and then at the young man in simple clothes. He knew David by name and was aware of his reputation as one of the best lawyers in town. "Ah, Mr. David, always a pleasure to see you," the officer said, nodding respectfully. "What happened exactly?" "This delinquent," David said, pointing at Justin as if he were dealing with the worst of criminals, "took my briefcase at the cafe and was about to run away with it. I caught him on my way and caught him red-handed. I want him arrested immediately." Justin, with a trembling voice, tried to speak. "Officer, I found the briefcase at the cafe. The barista even described Mr. David, and I just wanted to return it. I wasn't trying to steal anything." The officer frowned for a brief moment but soon returned to his usual expression. He looked Justin up and down, who appeared even more vulnerable in front of the authority, then turned to David, who was still seething with anger. "Listen here, kid," the officer said sternly. "If Mr. David is saying you took his briefcase, then that's it. He's a respectable man, and you, well, you look like you're in trouble." "But I didn't do anything wrong," Justin exclaimed, desperate. "I was just trying to return what wasn't mine." "Enough with the excuses," David interrupted, his tone cutting. "You're going to spend a good amount of time in jail for this. And don't think you'll get away with it. I'll sue you and make sure you stay locked up for as long as possible." The officer nodded, not hesitating any longer. "I'm taking you to the holding cell. We'll sort this out formally later," he said as he approached Justin and began to cuff him. Justin looked at David, his eyes wide with disbelief and sadness. "Please, sir, I'm telling the truth," but David turned his face away, impassive. "You're going to pay for this," he said in a cold voice. "I'll make sure you never dare cross my path again." As Justin was led to the cell, David continued to hurl threats. "You're going to spend the rest of your life behind bars, you miserable thief." And with those words, David left the precinct, feeling victorious, unaware that he was about to face a very different truth than he imagined. Hours after Justin's arrest, his parents, George and Donna, arrived at the station with pale, tense faces. They had received a call from the officer informing them that their son was detained and facing serious theft charges. Upon entering the building, they spotted Justin sitting in a simple cell, his shoulders slumped and his gaze downcast. Donna rushed toward him while George walked quickly toward the on-duty officer. "My son. What happened? How did you end up here?" Donna asked, her voice trembling as she grasped Justin's hand through the bars of the cell. "Calm down, Mom," Justin replied, trying to keep his composure despite the situation. "I was just trying to return a briefcase I found at the cafe. It belonged to a lawyer named David, and he accused me of theft. I swear I didn't do anything wrong." George, standing next to his wife, stared intently at the officer. "This can't be right. Justin would never do something like this. He's been out all day handing out resumes." The officer, lacking much emotion, crossed his arms and responded, "Well, Mr. David, the lawyer who filed the complaint, is a very respected person in this city. He claims he caught your son with the briefcase in hand, ready to run away. The evidence, so far, is against your son. We can't release him until the trial, which will be next week." Donna gasped in disbelief. "Trial? What do you mean? He's going to be tried for something he didn't do." Justin, even more concerned about the gravity of the situation, leaned closer to the bars. "Mom, Dad, listen to me. We can't waste any time. You need a lawyer and you have to gather evidence of my innocence. Go to the cafe where this happened. Talk to the barista, she saw everything. And try to find someone from the businesses where I dropped off my resumes today. They can confirm that I was job hunting. They might even have some security footage." George nodded, determined. "I'll handle this, son. I'll find the evidence. Don't worry, we'll get you out of here." Donna wiped the tears from her eyes, forcing a smile. "We'll make it happen, Justin. I promise." The officer glanced at his watch and said flatly, "I suggest you hurry. The trial will be swift, considering Mr. David's reputation." George and Donna left the precinct with firm steps, knowing that every minute was crucial for their son's freedom. The following week, the day of the trial finally arrived. The small courtroom was packed. On one side, David sat confidently, his posture rigid, dressed in his sharpest suit. He murmured something to Kevin, his assistant, about how this trial would be an easy win. On the other side, Justin, pale and nervous, was with his parents next to the lawyer they had hastily hired. The judge, a stern-looking man in his middle ages, opened the proceedings. "We are here to hear the case of Mr. David against young Justin. Mr. David, please present your version of the facts." David stood up confidently and walked to the center of the room. "Your Honor, this case is as clear as day. Last week, I left my briefcase filled with very important documents at a cafe, and when I returned to retrieve it, I found this young man, Justin, with it. He was clearly trying to steal. When I confronted him, he concocted a story about wanting to return it, but his intentions were obvious. He's nothing but a thief, and I demand that he be punished to the fullest extent of the law." The judge nodded and turned to Justin's lawyer. "Mr. Ramos, please present the defense." The lawyer, an older and more experienced man, stood up and spoke calmly. "Your Honor, Justin was not trying to steal the briefcase. He's a humble young man who was at the cafe that day after spending the morning handing out resumes. When he saw the briefcase, he asked the staff whose it was, and they confirmed it belonged to a client who had already left. He was, in fact, trying to return the briefcase." David scoffed in disdain, but the judge gestured for him to calm down. "Continue." Ramos signaled to the door of the courtroom, and the barista, named Carol, entered and was called to testify. "Ms. Carol, please tell us what you saw that day." Carol, a bit nervous, began to speak. "I remember that day very well, Your Honor. This young man, Justin, asked about the briefcase. He said he wanted to return it. I told him it belonged to a gentleman who had just left, a tall man with white hair and in a suit. He seemed very determined to find the owner." The judge frowned, and David looked visibly uncomfortable. "Is there any more evidence, Mr. Ramos?" "Yes, Your Honor. We obtained footage from the cafe's security camera." "Here it is," Ramos said, handing the video to the court technician. The video was played. It clearly showed Justin picking up the briefcase and looking around, asking something of the barista. He then hurried out, clearly trying to find David. The footage was indisputable evidence of Justin's innocence. David began to sweat. His initial confidence vanished with each passing second. He tried to stand up to argue, but the judge interrupted him. "Mr. David, sit down. I've seen enough." The judge paused, looking around the room before continuing. "It's clear that young Justin had no intention of stealing the briefcase. He was trying to return it, as evidenced by the witnesses and the security footage. I declare the young man innocent of all charges." Justin and his parents breathed a sigh of relief, while David remained frozen in his seat, unable to believe what had just happened. But the judge was not finished. "Mr. David," the judge began in a stern tone, "your hasty and unfounded accusation caused serious harm to this young man. Furthermore, your behavior was inappropriate for someone in your position. As punishment, you will be required to compensate Justin for the emotional distress and suffering he and his family have endured. The amount will be determined at a later date, but I assure you it will not be small." David could barely breathe. The judge's words echoed in his mind. He, the great lawyer, was now being condemned to pay for his mistakes. The reputation he had built over so many years lay in ruins. The news of the trial spread quickly throughout the city. Within hours, all the newspapers and television stations were reporting on the case of David, the renowned lawyer who, in an act of arrogance and haste, unjustly accused a humble young man of theft. The story gained prominence not only due to David's involvement but also because of the injustice Justin suffered and a clear demonstration of abuse of power. The public, once admirers of the unbeatable lawyer, now viewed him in a different light, that of a man who, in his arrogance, destroyed his own reputation. The consequences for David were devastating. His name, once synonymous with competence and invincibility, was now mentioned with disdain in headlines. Social media was flooded with criticism, and former clients began to question his ethics. Many cancelled contracts, fearing that their association with him would tarnish their own reputations. Colleagues who had once respected or even feared him now avoided him. The office phone, which had once incessantly rung with new proposals, fell silent. The lawyer who built his career on an immaculate image of power and control was now crumbling before everyone's eyes. David tried to maintain his routine, but soon realized that the situation was irreversible. Everywhere he went, he felt the disapproving glares and heard the whispers around him. He knew he needed to do something, but his arrogance prevented him from publicly admitting his mistake until the pressure became unbearable. Meanwhile, Justin and his family, after the difficult period of the trial, finally managed to breathe a sigh of relief. The compensation David was ordered to pay was substantial, and with it, their lives began to change. George, Justin's father, had always dreamed of opening a small grocery store to support the family, but financial struggles had never allowed it. With the compensation money, that dream could finally become a reality. Justin and his parents joined forces and opened a grocery store in their neighborhood, a simple yet promising business that quickly became a community gathering spot. "Now, we're building something solid, something of our own," Justin said one day to his mother as they organized the shelves of the new establishment. "From something so bad came an opportunity to change our lives." As the months passed, the grocery store thrived. Justin became seen as an example of perseverance and courage. The community, aware of everything he had gone through, enthusiastically supported the new business, and the story of the young man who faced injustice and emerged victorious spread proudly among the neighbors. Justin's life was finally beginning to flourish. On the other hand, David, aware that his career and image were in collapse, made a decision he never thought possible. In a desperate effort to salvage what remained of his reputation, he called a press conference. Cameras from all the major networks were positioned in front of him, and reporters eagerly awaited his words. David approached the podium, his face pale and eyes weary. He took a deep breath before starting. "I come here today to talk about something very important. As everyone knows, I recently made a grave mistake by accusing young Justin of a crime he did not commit." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "My arrogance and my haste in drawing conclusions harmed not only an innocent young man but also his family, who suffered unnecessary distress because of me." The reporters began to murmur, but David pressed on, his voice steadier. "I am here to publicly apologize to Justin and his family. What I did was wrong, and I recognize that I allowed my position of power to cloud my judgment. They did not deserve what they went through." His words echoed in the living rooms of many people watching the live broadcast. For many, this was unexpected. David had never been the type to admit mistakes, and seeing him do so publicly elicited mixed reactions. For some, it was too late to repair the damage. For others, it was the first step toward possible redemption. A few days after the apology, David sought out Justin in person. It was a meeting he dreaded but knew had to happen. "Justin," David said, his voice low and resigned when they met at the family grocery store. "I came here to look you in the eye and apologize. I know I can't erase what I did, but I hope that, somehow, you can forgive me." Justin looked at him in silence for a moment. The emotional scars were still deep, but he was a person with a generous heart. "I accept your apology, Mr. David," Justin replied calmly. "I won't say it was easy, but I believe everyone deserves a chance to redeem themselves. I hope you make good use of this opportunity. David, surprised by Justin's maturity, nodded. Thank you, he said, feeling the weight of those words. From that moment on, David began working to rebuild his life and, above all, his reputation. Although he knew his name would never be the same in the legal world, he was willing to spend the rest of his life trying to make amends for his mistakes. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.